Great. Well, welcome everyone to the FE Week HQ for our first roundtable debate, and this will be, of course, about FE loans. Delighted to have you all with us. If we could start, Andrew, with a kind of a brief bit of context about the policy itself.
Sure. Yeah, that's fine, and it's kind of slightly odd given that there are so many people who know so much about the policy around the table already. But in terms of where we are and what the position is, obviously, as part of the spending review in 2010, there was an announcement that we'd no longer be grant funding those over the age of 24 to do advanced and higher level qualifications through further education. Obviously that's part of a wider government agenda in terms of looking at sort of the current economic position, but also looking at seriously what courses and what provision people should be funding themselves, where they should be making a greater contribution. Obviously, to offset that and to offset the potential impact of removing that grant funding, the decision was taken to introduce a system of further education loans. And as you mentioned, the name is being considered at the moment, and we can obviously talk more about that. And a budget was set through the spending review for 13-14, 14-15 to support a system of loans that would be based upon the HE system, so would be repaid on an income contingent basis, so repayments would only be made at 9% above the repayment threshold of 21,000. Obviously, subsequent to that, there was a consultation held last summer, which also included the publication of the initial impact assessment and a screening and quality impact assessment, which we're due to publish final versions of both of those documents this month. That also coincided with the commissioning during last year of further research to look at the potential impact on learners of the introduction of loans, and again that research is due to be published. Actually we're hoping to publish it this Friday, so that's where we are, that's the position in terms of that. Obviously the stage that we're at now, and we've had ongoing discussions with the sector and ongoing discussions with stakeholders, is the need to provide much greater detail in terms of how the system will work, how it will be implemented, and how or what people need to do in terms of building the loans into their business plans and into the way in which they operate.
And of course, as you say, encouraging colleges to consider how this will be implemented as part of business planning processes now. Maxine Room, you're from a college. This is obviously going to have a significant impact on the way that you run your business. Tell us a little bit about your views and how you think it would play out in practice.
I think our major concern is both internal and external communication. So an understanding in the external world of how people access these loans. And I think what you mentioned there in terms of the devil is in the detail. And then the lead-in time, because if this is going to happen and the government seems to be resolute about it happening, even though the sector may not fully support it, then how much time are we actually going to have in order to be able to communicate effectively to learners so that they have an understanding? There's already some discrepancy of understanding about the difference between HE and FE and what that will mean. And although you might have a long name that describes the 24 plus advanced loans or whatever it's going to be, people may think externally that FE loans apply to any course for adults and even 16 to 18 year olds, and I think there has been some confusion already and very little information that people can work on in terms of how we communicate that.
Gordon Marsden, you've been out and about and meeting with various providers and learners. What are you hearing while you've been out on your roadshows?
Well, I have to say, and you're right, Nick, I mean, I have been going around. We had a meeting in Redbridge the other week, we had a big meeting in Manchester. I've been talking on a one-to-one basis with local college principals and, of course, with the various stakeholders. And I suppose the overriding impression is of something that is potentially going to be very complex to implement, because FE, I mean, government can say till it's blue in the face that it will be done in the same way as HE loans. They may want to use the same instrument, the Student Loans Company, but it's a very different kettle of fish, delivering loans across variable courses for variable lengths at variable times of the year, to doing a sort of one-size-fits-all thing with HE loans. So I think that there's a lot of concern about that. There's a lot of concern, I think, that, I mean, the overriding thing, I think, is that this is a policy which is going to be implemented, if not in recession, hopefully, by the time it's implemented, at least in a time of deep economic uncertainty. And FE loans, persuading people to take on FE loans in a time of expansion, of optimism, I think would be a challenge. For them to take it on in a time of dearth is a very different proposition. If that's going to be successful, then people have to have maximum confidence in the delivery mechanisms, maximum confidence in the research, and frankly so far there's been very little detail on that research, and I shall wait with bated breath to see just exactly what the methodology and everything else is of the survey that was done, which is supposed to be coming out on Friday. And I think the whole picture that is building up is a concern that people will be nudged away from FE and real severe difficulties about the implementation period and the relative breakneck speed at which this is now proceeding. Yes, it was flagged up in 2010, but what has actually happened between 2010 and up to the last 6 months? The answer is very little.
And of course, as we understand it, learners will be able to start applying, making applications to the Student Loans Company from April, so less than a year from now. These are learners, some of which you may be working with, Kate. You're from Greenwich Community College.
Yeah.
What's the feeling? Are we talking yet to learners? What's your view of the policy?
No, we're not yet, and I don't think staff are aware of it. Senior management team may well be, but I don't think staff lower down the college, and teachers who are involved in enrolment and marketing who have to promote the college are going to find it very difficult to market. We've spent a lot of time trying to engage adult learners over 24s and particularly women in our community, and it's going to be very difficult to sell that whole notion to them, and lots of our learners are trying not to live in debt and try very, very hard to have minimum debt and only for absolute essentials, and education may be lower down their list of things to do. So we're going to worry for our students, and then that's going to mean job losses, that's going to mean constant funding changes for the college and restructuring that happens kind of year on year as people shuffle things around to try and accommodate everyone. So I think we'd be worried at every level, really, I think.
Peter, you work for a company which delivers apprenticeships. You also represent the apprenticeship training agencies. What's the feeling there? Because I'm not sure everyone appreciates that this will affect employees doing level 3 and above apprenticeships as well. They will have to take out loans.
Indeed, and I also have another one that I run a business organisation, and I'm also from a business perspective, we support the policy. It's absolutely the right policy. Will it hurt FE colleges? Yes. Will it hurt adult community colleges? Yes. But that's not the priority. If the priority is to shift money towards young people in an age when we have millions of young people unemployed, and that's where you want to shift money, we support it. If you ask any business about the need of businesses, they'll say two things. We want people to have employability skills and basic skills to have full functional skills. They want people to have that. If money shifted towards that and something else has to be sacrificed, that unfortunately is the right choice to make. The other thing I think will happen with this, and I feel sympathy for other colleagues who deliver learning. We deliver learning. Part of my organisation is a training provider. But I know you say it will lead to job losses and restructuring. Yes, that's absolutely true. But what it will also do is create a truer market for post-24 learning. Because at the moment, there is almost guesswork. The FE colleges have this impossible task of trying to predict what employers want, and employers never actually say what they want until it's too late. And that debate is constantly going on. Here what you're doing is saying to the individuals, if you are working for company X and you want to upskill yourself, there is a way of doing that, and you borrow that money and you can upskill yourself and get a reward for that. They will choose the courses that truly will help them make more money. Just on the name's dreadful, by the way. If you want a name that actually describes the product, don't come up with a public sector name, come up with a name that actually describes what it is to the consumer. The consumer is the learners. This is an upskilling loan. Just call it that. If you want to get upskilled, this is the loan to get. But overall, yes, I support the policy.
Okay, thank you. Gordon, did you want to come back?
Well, it was really just a couple of points. I mean, points I think that Peter might want to comment on. Points Andrew, I hope, will certainly want to comment on. You're talking about the true market for post-24 learning. But there you are, sitting as chairman of this ATA group. I mean, what is your view on the very strong expression that's already been given by the UK Commission for Employment and Skills in their submission on the consultation that the level 3 plus FE loans of 24 are simply not going to work for apprenticeships, because the fact of the matter is that most post 24 apprenticeships in work are being paid below normal salary because they're apprentices. They're now being asked to take on a loan as individuals to supplement and support that process. I mean, my concern, and certainly the government I think should be concerned, that their much vaunted expansion in post-24 apprenticeships could well fall off a cliff if this goes wrong, because you'll get droves and droves of people not prepared to take a post-24 apprenticeship up on an individual basis. And indeed, I mean, I've spoken to employers, I don't know which ones you've spoken to, I've spoken to employers who say, well, you know, this is crazy, why isn't it being done on a group basis?
Peter, if you'd like to respond, and then perhaps we'll put to Anne as well about the impact on apprenticeships.
Yeah, indeed. You mentioned the issue about apprenticeship training agencies. Apprenticeship training agencies aren't funded by the state. The deal that we have is that we enter into an arrangement with an employer where we employ the young person, and the employer pays us enough money to pay the wages and the fee. And predominantly the young people we employ are sub 24. Now, you're absolutely right about the 24 plus and the massive growth the government has been boasting about over recent times. Some of that I think is highly suspect. Some of that is training that the employers would have paid for anyway if it wasn't for the government subsidy. But will those numbers go down? Yes, it will go down. I agree with you, it will go down. But what I would like is that if we've got a limited amount of resource, that resource is focused at those under 24 without a level 2 or level 3 qualification, and that if we want people to upskill, and we certainly do, to upskill at a higher level, employers either pay for it, or the individuals get loans on qualifications that truly meet their needs. And I'm not convinced the range of qualifications that are offered to 24 plus truly meets the needs of employers or people at 24.
How do you respond to that, Andrew, in the context of the impact for apprentices particularly, and also given, I mean, it's a limited budget, the places could run out,
Yep.
apprentices are started during the year, what happens if there's no money left come January? What sort of impact assessment has there been in that marketplace?
Can I just mention it, just sort of say about apprenticeships, and I kind of would agree, and I agree with Gordon that obviously we did get responses through the consultation about concerns about apprenticeships, and it is something that we have looked at sort of very seriously and worked with employers, probably some of the same employers who have serious concerns about how this would operate. It's obviously something that we've looked at as part of the research as well, and looked at what would actually the attitude of apprentices be, and it's common across all of the research we've looked at. Is the key thing here is, do people value the course, and do people understand what they will get at the end of it? And once people understand that, or once people are in that mindset in terms of that's why they're undertaking the provision that they are, and they can understand and see the benefits that they'll receive at the end of it, but once they understand the offer of the loan that's available to them, then that's when they're willing, and that's when they're able to consider taking that out and see the value of the loan offer that's available, rather than just the increasing debt that it might otherwise be seen as. In terms of your specific point, Nick, about the impact in terms of apprenticeships going on throughout the year, I mean, one of the things that we've obviously had to do as we've been developing the loans approach with the Skills Funding Agency and the Student Loans Company is look at how the loan system as currently operates will apply to further education. And Gordon mentioned that within FE you do have starts throughout the year, you do have variable course lengths, which is much less the case on the HE side. So we have had to look at how the systems operate in relation to that, and ensure that there are systems in place that can be dealt with, and how we then explain and sort of can explain to providers how it will operate is a key element, of which a particular key element is how the allocation of places will operate, how the allocation of budget will operate. And as you say, that will be the key in terms of determining whether there is space in the budget, whether there are places available during the year as people access courses and as people submit applications for the courses that they want to undertake.
Because there do seem to be quite a lot of unknowns still, and not a lot of time. Toni, this is something you've been obviously talking with students and policymakers and others about, and I know you've got some strong views. Share some of those with us. Where are you at the NUS?
Yeah, so I think there are kind of several things. I mean, in the short term, I think there are so many unanswered questions from the government, and I think those kind of range from how the Student Loans Company will possibly be able to cope with what is a complete unknown really in terms of FE loans. I mean, we've had a series of, actually quite a long time leading to the current HE funding policy that we have now, and to move straight from subsidised further education to loans with the same terms and conditions of HE, I think is a huge step to take without allowing the sector to kind of respond to that. And then I think there's a huge oversight in that. I think people seem to be forgetting that in higher education, the interface between the funder and the student loans company is UCAS, between the provider and the student loans company. And actually that doesn't exist in further education. And so for the SRC to only have to interface with UCAS is one thing, but to have to interface with a variety of different providers in the country, where actually we could well be in a situation where students receive a loan and don't get onto their course, or get onto their course and then don't receive a loan, because those two things have to interface separately. There were other things where I guess the other day in a meeting with the minister, we asked if he knew if the terms and conditions would be fixed for further education loans in the way that they definitely aren't for higher education, which in effect means you might actually be in a more stable situation taking out a commercial loan to pay for that education, and actually most people advising you on which loans to take out would tell you to take out a commercial loan because at least your terms and conditions are fixed. And I guess that this is where I kind of don't really understand the motivation for the policy, is that in the short term, yes, it will take some burden out of the department, but actually there will be a much greater burden in terms of resource when it comes to explaining this to people, spending money on advertising and marketing and ensuring that people understand it, because the policy seems to be from the department at the minute that if we just explain this to people then they'll surely begin to agree with it. I don't necessarily think that that's true, but that's going to cost a huge amount of money, and actually the implementation of this will cost a huge amount of money. And then I suppose in the long term this doesn't save any money. This is more expensive as a policy. It creates a greater burden in 10 years' time on the Treasury than just funding the course in the first place would have. I mean, if you were going to subsidise the courses by 50% up until now, and you believe that you'll get a 40% return on your outlay in years to come, that means that you're moving from a 50% subsidy to a 60% subsidy. So surely that is, that doesn't make any sense in this sort of economic.
What's your response to that, Andrew? Because I know you were quite involved in the original impact assessment last year, where the view, as Tony's referred to, was that an expectation about 40% of the loan value would end up being repaid in that rolling kind of 30-year period. I mean, clearly it's being implemented to try and save money, as I understand it, given the fiscal constraints. Can we just be asked
just get clarified, because this figure has wobbled around. How much money at the moment is the government estimating this will save? How much money is this going to go back to the Treasury as a result of the implementation of this process?
Well, the budget for loans is 129 million in 13-14 and 398 million in 14-15. Sure. And obviously that's a reclassification of the budget from the department's budget to a kind of an AME, sorry to use that term, but a kind of a Treasury controlled budget. And it would be 40% of that budget that we expect to be repaid through loans, or at least a minimum of 40%.
So how much money, the basic question people are going to ask after all this trouble and strife is, how much money is the government actually saving as a result of this? And is there a ballpark figure for that?
Well, it would be 40% of those figures.
Sorry, I'm trying to do the math. Yes, so that 40% of what's that? About 520?
Yeah.
And that's minus the costs for increased information, advice and guidance, this consultation period, the implementation, marketing, rebranding systems, student loans company, cost of new staff at the student loans company.
And also, as I understand it, for classroom provision, say for example an access to HE course, where at the moment the learner may be contributing already through a fee, 50% of the course, they will get a fully funded course. So essentially that course becomes twice as expensive to the immediate term through the payment from the student loans company, of which then 40% of that will get paid back. So I think the point Toni was making is that when you kind of look at the numbers in that way, there'll be fewer opportunities because more of the loan funding is being used used up on fewer places. Is that right?
Well, it's not quite right, and the impact assessment did cover this in as much as we're not talking about a straightforward cohort that was always 50% funded previously and are now going to be funded by 100% of loan. There was a mix of people who would have previously received 100% funding and apprenticeships who were previously funded at 50% and will continue to be funded at 50% under the loan scheme. So if you look at the cohort as a whole, there is actually an increased amount that we can afford through introducing the loan scheme compared to what we would have afforded under a grant funded system.
That's only true if all the prices for education stay the same. And actually, if I was a provider and I knew that all of my potential students could get a loan of up to £4,000 to cover the cost of their course, I'd be absolutely inclined to put the prices of my courses up to ensure that I get the best funded provision possible.
Tony, not necessarily. Your points about simplicity I agree with entirely, because if it's made complicated then it's going to kill the scheme anyway. I also agree with your point about a commercial loan, because some of the rates they're talking about, you'd be better off going to a local bank. But on price, it's interesting what could happen, because if the colleges are competing and the providers are competing to get people to pay, then what they're trying to persuade people is to get as small a loan as possible to join their course. The prices may actually go down rather than up.
So that would mean that if you wanted to go to the most competitive place because you were looking for value for money, you are likely then to end up with a provider who charges less money and so therefore has less money to spend on your course. So actually, the more debt averse you are, the more likely you are to have a less well-funded course. And I also think the idea of a market in further education, particularly for this group of people, I very rarely meet students who say that they make decisions about further education in the same way they do about higher education. They don't look at what the offer is nationally and then decide where they're going because of the quality of provision necessarily. They're much more likely to go to their local provider in their community for convenience or go with the provider who's linked to their employer.
And the more barriers you put in place for learners, the less likely they are to engage. The harder you have to work as a provider to provide the information. Therefore, it doesn't cost the Treasury directly in terms of what they're doing, but it costs colleges or providers more to do that work, and we will be doing that work on the ground to persuade students that this course, and it was interesting your comment, I mean, colleges get criticised for the provision. The provision is the funded provision that has been agreed is the provision that is needed for the country, as I understand it. We influence that as much as we possibly can, and we review as a college each year what we will provide, taking into account labour market information, UKCS, all those things. But actually, funding drives behaviour. So necessarily, if we're offering a plumbing qualification, that qualification is endorsed somewhere, and therefore we will provide it because we understand that's what the employers want in order to get plumbers.
Just let me pause for a moment there.
So we would want to offer the range of qualifications which are appropriate for employment of the future. What we talk about at Lewisham College is where we're going, not where we've been. We're looking at ways in which we can engage much more directly, given some of the things that have come out of New Challenges, New Chances about governance, and engaging employers with us much more directly in our governance model, in order that we can directly deliver that which is needed. Because we hear this all the time. Employers don't know what they want, colleges don't provide what they want. How do we get them together? But it is quite a difficult one to effect. But that's where we're going, certainly for the future, as our merged college.
I agree with what Maxine, the point she made about it, and the practical thing is the vast majority of people will go to the people they know locally for advice on this, and they will be the people who will be dealing with this at the end of the day. And my concern, the concern that I've heard strongly expressed from staff and colleges who go around the country, is that we will have a repeat of the problems that there have been for colleges in extra administration, both of the changes on EMA and the changes on ESOL. Which essentially meant that colleges then became huge, bespoke providers of time and information and guidance. And it's interesting that the government hasn't mentioned so far, and you haven't mentioned so far, Andrew, whether the all-age career service is going to have any role in this at all. I mean, given the concerns about its delivery pre-24, a lot will ride on post-24. But the other thing I'd just like to come back to you on, when you were talking about the statistics and the figures, behaviours and the impact assessment. But as Maxine said, behaviour is changed by funding, but behaviour is also changed by aspiration. And one of the things that I have discovered as I've gone around, and this was very clear talking to students in Redbridge, it was clear talking to principals and students in Manchester, that there is, if I can put it this way without being negative, just objectively, there is an increasing scale up, a grade inflation, if you like, of what people feel that they need to achieve in order to set up their own business. Met 2 or 3 people at Redbridge who wanted to do that, upskill, get promotion, etc. So if you're getting, and that is an upscale from people either wanting to or being advised to take level 2 courses to now being take level 3 courses. Now, if that trend, and as many cases as a de facto license to practice. Now, if that trend continues, all of the statistics, and you're already looking in that impact assessment on the assumption that 20% of the existing market will drop out, all of your statistics will be extremely off-centre, because actually you're going to have large numbers of people trading up to level 3. They will then be caught, or inverted commas, attracted by the loans situation. So all of your statistics in terms of funding take-up, and indeed the pressure that then bears down on the amount of money that is available for the loans, will go haywire. And what you'll either have to do is go cap in hand to the Treasury and ask for an expansion of the provision, or be forced to actually restrict access to them even further.
And what criteria will you use to do that?
I mean, that's certainly something that I was raising earlier about, when it runs out at the beginning of the year, if that happens, and you could that obviously be seen as a great success that's been taken up in big numbers. But when it runs out, anyone that wants to start age 24 and above, for example, on an apprenticeship at level 3 would not be eligible for a loan, let alone any form of state subsidy. I wanted to pick up though a bit on the administration side, because obviously you can argue, and we have been debating the merits of a loan system or not, and there's been several views on the benefits or otherwise of that. But if we set that aside for a moment and say that it's just going to happen, or we accept that and so forth, what about the implementation side? Because it is, like I say, less than a year from which people will be applying. I understand that at least in the first year it will be a paper-based submission to the student's loan company, application from the learner, so using in that sense kind of snail mail. And I'm hearing on the ground, I don't know if you've got a view on this, Kate, from your perspective, I'm hearing on the ground quite a bit of concern from those that aren't talking about loans about the time it's going to take for learners to be approved before they can know if they can start the course.
Yeah. Well, I think this would be a real worry, and having looked at some of the HE loan website things last night, at how many people were concerned that the money hadn't got through and people had started courses, and FE students won't be able to support them in all that, and as you were saying before, people might be on courses but not get their money, and get their money not be on courses, and we'll have to retrain the whole of our college into how to implement this, so that every member of staff will understand what's involved, what are the implications, what to do if you've got a student on a course who then doesn't get funded. Do we withdraw them and that hits our success rates and that hits our funding in another direction, or do we keep them fingers crossed that the money comes through? What would we do in the classroom with students who are in the dilemma?
So work at risk, really, for us.
I mean, what's the response, Andrew? Is there a plan B? Are we fully confident that in the time left this is doable?
I think what we would say is that the paper-based system is obviously our fallback position, and where we kind of know we can get to for 13-14, but our hope is that we get to a position where we can introduce an online system as early as possible. Whether that's for April next year, we can't commit to at this stage.
It's been ruled out, as I understand it. Is that not the case?
It hasn't been ruled out, but obviously,
it's certainly not been ruled in.
Well, you should know by now, surely. And it's a system. It's less than a year. It's going to be a system that needs to be implemented. Are you saying that this decision has not yet been made as to whether it can be implemented by April?
We're saying that we're working on the basis of a paper-based system for launch in April next year. Obviously, the plan has always been that would come before an online system. So at the same time as we're developing the paper-based system, we're obviously developing the online system as well.
For a later, for second year.
And what we're trying to do, and obviously taking on board the comments about the potential time, and obviously having a paper-based system isn't ideal, and looking at whether that can be accelerated and whether we can introduce it earlier or not. So that's why I'm saying saying. It's not that we've made the decision not to have an online system, but obviously we're working as much as we can to accelerate that process and potentially bring it forward. But I appreciate that obviously the position, and we need to clarify, and that's why there'll be support events throughout the summer that the agency will run in conjunction with the Student Loans Company, that there'll be a business change programme with the Learning and Skills Improvement Service for providers in order to understand how the systems will operate, what they will need to do, what kind of training will need to be in place for staff, and all of those sorts of things based upon the system that will be in place.
Because of course we're in May already, aren't we? And the Skills Funding Agency have not advertised or coordinated, to my knowledge, with anyone about any events in June or the beginning of July before summer kicks in. Yeah. My understanding is on some of the most basic issues, such as whether or not a loan would incorporate some of the funding uplifts, without getting too technical, such as, if it were to include disadvantage uplift, that would be an incredible unintended consequence where the loan value increases the more from an area of disadvantage in which you live. Given that some of those things haven't been decided, there's got to be a big question about some of the impact assessment, because you need to know that to know the impact, and if that hasn't been decided, and like I say, these events that you refer to, communication hasn't yet been sent out for people to even put them in their diary yet.